don't understand. You don't know, I can't go into it right this moment. Okay. L.S. Lowry is unique among artists in having gained both public affection and critical acclaim. His view of the world charms and delights. He was honoured with a major retrospective at Tate Britain in 2013. His distinguished admirers include renowned actors such as Timothy Spall, who played him in the 2019 film Mrs. Lowry and Son. L.S. Lowry is so quintessentially British. Here at Richard Green, we have a long tradition of buying and selling Lowry paintings. Over 400 have passed through our hands since the early 1970s, beginning during Lowry's lifetime. Some works we have owned, sold and bought back 2 and 3 times. In 1968, my father, Richard Green, acquired his first painting by Lowry at the seaside for £3,000 and sold it 3 days later to Sir Winston Churchill's daughter, Lady Soames. The record price for a Lowry at auction now stands at £7.8 million for Going to the Match in 1953. This was purchased by the Lowry Art Gallery in Salford in 2022 and is currently touring museums in the northwest of England. Enthusiasm for his work continues to grow with a worldwide following of collectors. Here we have a selection of 10 works for sale dating from 1955 to 1971, which will be on view at the gallery from the 4th of June. Our researcher Rachel has selected a few highlights.
Lowry often painted composite scenes or dreamscapes, as he liked to call them, but this street in Salford is based on Francis Terrace, built in the 1850s on the east side of the River Irwell and demolished in 1959, a year after this was painted. The area was in desperate need of redevelopment in the aftermath of the Second World War. Before it was destroyed, Lowry was commissioned by the curator of Salford Art Gallery to record streets in the neighbourhood of the museum. The street captured Lowry's imagination, and he made a number of images of it, on paper and on canvas, which are recognisable from contemporary photographs. However, in this painting, Lowry replaced the decapitated lamppost and chose to move it to the middle of the street, at the heart of a tight-knit community, its centrality drawing us straight into the celebratory scene, in which neighbours gossip, children play and dogs walk themselves. The cul-de-sac of twinned 2-up, 2-down terraces provides a wonderful set for Lowry's human drama, with fantastic characters entering from doorways on both sides like the wings of a stage. Painted a few years later in 1962, Street is even more focused on the figures that populate Lowry's street scenes, with buildings deeply cropped either side to echo and frame them. The industrial metropolis is still present in the background, and a series of diminishing telegraph poles on the left leads us to it, with smoking chimneys and church towers, but it's a pale backdrop now, throwing the colourful foreground characters into relief. The figure of the man on the left is classic Lowry, with Chaplin-esque bowler hat, boots and cane. I'd love to know more about the connection between the artist and the actor-director, who was 2 years his junior. In his exhibition catalogue for the Tate retrospective a few years ago, T.J. Clark wrote that Chaplin's Easy Street and The Vagabond were touchstones for Lowry, and there's a comparable humour and warmth to their working-class representations. We can see another version of the man in the bowler hat resting on his cane in the same way in the Family Outing 1960. This charming work has been with the gallery several times, first in 2005, then again in 2017. Here the industrial scene has entirely disappeared, leaving 3 elegant figures, perhaps on their way to the theatre. Towards the end of the 1950s, Lowry began to paint figures standing on their own against his distinctive flake white ground, applied directly from the tube in several layers. Edwin Bowes writes of Lowry's technique. Before he applied the second coat, he might wait 3 months or a year, and occasionally he might apply a third. Consequently, when he finally came to work on such a heavily textured surface, it would feel like he was painting on rough stone. Later, however, in the 50s and 60s, He sometimes painted on top of, or rather into, his white ground, whilst it was still wet. While the family outing has been owned by several private collectors over the years, Yachts at Lytham St Anne's was purchased directly from Lowry's Lefebvre Gallery exhibition of recent pictures by Lord Beaverbrook, and later gifted by him to the museum he founded in Fredericton, in Canada. Lowry's seascapes have a mesmeric air, their thick, scumbled and empasted waves, tinted ochre and Prussian blue, drawing us into their serene and seemingly infinite depths. Lowry spent many childhood holidays with his parents at Lytham St Anne's, a resort on the Lancashire coast, and began his career with images of the sea. He painted several scenes of yachts at Lytham, the present work, one of the strongest and most successful, balancing a beautiful compositional arrangement with a masterful application of predominantly white paint. Here Lowry includes two figures in rowing boats to the right, which also feature in his earlier painting of 1912. The painting is perhaps most comparable in style, palette and technique to Yachts at Lytham or Sailing Boats 1930, another significant picture belonging to the Lowry estate and currently on loan to Manchester City Art Gallery. This earlier picture featured in the recent film Mrs. Lowry and Son, and is believed to have been a favourite of the artist's mother, hanging proudly on the wall of his home in Mottram until he died. In the 1960s and early 70s, Lowry depicted people walking or standing along a seaside esplanade, possibly based on studies he made in the northeast at Sunderland. A chance visit to Sunderland in 1960, stopping for a late lunch with friends at the Seaburn Hotel, led to a close association with the city, which became Lowry's base for frequent visits to the northeast over the next 15 years. Its connection to shipping and shipbuilding drew the artist, and its proximity to the sea in particular, which became increasingly important to Lowry. Only the road and promenade separated the Seaburn Hotel from the beach, allowing Lowry to look directly out over the North Sea from his bedroom and from his table in the dining room. It had a quiet Victorian feeling that he liked, reminding him of the family holidays at Lytham St Anne's that he'd enjoyed long before. Several figures, including two children, gaze towards the coastline just visible beyond the railings which roughly divide this delightful canvas. Two smartly dressed women walk along the promenade in warm coats, hats and colourful scarves, one in the centre of the upright canvas and the other cropped at the ankles to the right of the foreground, drawing us into the scene. In contrast, two male figures stand still, taking in the sea air and having a cigarette. Lowry enjoyed painting the interaction between pairs of figures and painted two works entitled Two Men Talking, the first in 1941 and the second 23 years later. At roughly the same size, both upright works feature two standing figures dressed in dark suits facing each other in an interior. The changes Lowry made more than 2 decades later to the figures and their setting transformed the impact of this rare and powerful painting. Here the two men glare at each other, their chalk-white faces expressing anger and frustration, echoed by the placement of their hands, previously in their pockets, the figure on the right forming a fist. In contrast to the relaxed, conversational atmosphere of the earlier painting, the figures confront each other face to face, their rigid poses filled with tension, echoed in the emotive background. While the light setting of the earlier work contained details of an office interior, a bookshelf, desk, door, here only the ground is defined against a striking red screen, accentuating the heated tone and intensity of their psychological exchange. The backdrop is far from flat, however, its colour ranging from ochre to vermilion with white striations applied in bold vertical strokes, its vivid fluctuation adding further drama. Lowry remarked of his later character studies, "I think this is my best period. I think I'm saying more, going deeper into life than I did." We're looking forward to showing this group of paintings by L.S. Lowry to the public from the 4th of June, But in the meantime, you can see works by the artist on permanent display at the Lowry Art Gallery in Salford.